but they are firing at us. So we have no other option. We are in a war. This is a war zone. And it's full with enemy ammunition, IEDs, RPGs, everywhere. Mortars that they are firing from this neighborhood to Israel. Mortars, I know, it's a beautiful place, I know. Could be. But they are firing from here to Tel Aviv. Did you also see this when you run here?
He responded in a way that suggested my question came from a place of luxury, of privilege, and of moral luck. His point was fundamentally that the Israeli soldiers that he commanded had had no choice but to fire back at the places where the Hamas fighters were, and by extension destroy or damage the buildings in which Hamas was hiding.
I think we can all understand the need to take out rocket launchers and places where there are Hamas members firing at Israel, but in every part of this area, it's basically all gone. Did it all of it have to be taken out?
Every place that fire on Israeli soldiers need to be taken out. Yes, we are in a war, sir. It is what it is.
How much?
And they could live here. People, Gaza's people, not Hamas. Gaza's civilians. Beautiful life. But it was not what they chose.
And this was a microcosm of his wider point, which was that while to me this looked like a deathscape, a hellscape, ruin upon ruin, that fundamentally was something that Hamas had brought on itself.
This is fundamentally the Israeli case.
Yes, and it's a refrain that you hear in Israel over and over.
We'll be right back.
I'm Lydia Polgreen.
I'm Michelle Cottle.
I'm Ross Dowson.
I'm Carlos Lozana.
And we are all writers for the New York Times opinion section.
And we have a podcast. It's called Matter of Opinion.
Each week we'll pick a topic from the news, from politics and culture, from our own work. We'll go in depth, we'll talk it through with each other, debating but also trying to just make sense of what is, let's face it, a pretty weird and fascinating time to be alive.
Listen to Matter of Opinion. Thinking aloud.
It's thoughts.
Thoughts
It's
aloud.
Thoughts?
God.
Okay. Thoughts aloud.
Matter of Opinion every Friday.
Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
So Patrick, we were just talking about your visit inside Al-Shifa hospital. And in that visit, you saw suggestive but not conclusive evidence of Israel's claim that there's a Hamas command center under it. What has happened since your visit?
Since my visit, they've released more evidence. They have shown 2 more videos of the shaft that we visited, but this time they've shown us what the shaft leads to, and the shaft seems to lead to a tunnel that extends perhaps dozens of meters underneath the ground until it reaches a metal door, and that's when the videos that they have released stop.
And has the Times independently confirmed that this is in fact from Shifa, this video?
Yes, we've confirmed, both our video investigation team has confirmed that this video is from Shifa, and we can see from the images ourselves, me and my colleagues who were down there on Friday morning, that this was the same shaft that we looked at. And that's not the only bit of evidence the Israeli army has produced since we visited. They've also released closed-circuit television footage that shows people dragging in someone under duress into the entrance of one of the buildings of the Shifa hospital, and it also shows them wheeling someone who looks badly injured through on a gurney through the corridors of Shifa Hospital. The Israeli army says that these people were people that were kidnapped on October 7th, and that this is more evidence that Hamas used the Shifa Hospital as some kind of military command center. And the Times has also verified the location. What we haven't done is confirm the exact timings of those videos, although the videos themselves do have the date of October 7th in the top left-hand corner.
So bringing the hostages into the hospital could actually mean that Hamas is using it as some kind of base of some sort.
Exactly. There's a counter-argument that says that just because they brought in injured people into the hospital, that doesn't mean that the hospital is being used as some kind of military nerve center. Those people perhaps were injured and needed to be treated. The counter-argument to that is that at least one of those people does not seem to be badly injured. And secondly, there is more than one hospital in Gaza. In fact, there's scores of hospitals. And if Hamas or their allies were really concerned about rushing people to have medical treatment, they could have gone to any number of other medical centers and hospitals that are closer to Israel than Shifa.
Patrick, to the question that we started this conversation with, the question of whether there is proof of the Israeli claim that there is a command center under the hospital, there is more evidence, but it does still seem to stop short of conclusive proof, right?
That's right. Lots of intriguing evidence is coming out. But from a journalistic point of view, if this was a New York Times investigation, our editors would say to us, go back and gather more evidence. This is not the conclusive slam dunk that you're saying that it is. And indeed, that is what our editors are saying right now. We're still saying that this stops short, so far, of conclusive proof of a military command center underneath the hospital.
But is a tunnel with a big metal door that goes down deep into the earth not pretty damning of Hamas, though? I mean, why would there be a tunnel under a hospital at all?
That's a very good question, and one that we're all asking. And there don't seem to be that many innocent explanations for why that would be. All that said, this still falls short of conclusive proof, and we need to wait days, possibly weeks, for further evidence to be presented.
So in a world where this is the extent of the evidence, of the claim that Hamas is underground there at the hospital, what does it mean about the broader underlying justification for hitting a lot of the civilian places that have been hit? If this is it, if this is all we're ever going to see in terms of evidence, what does it mean?
I think it means that in the outside world, the battle lines that have already been drawn between Israel and its supporters and the Palestinians and their supporters will not really shift. And it's going to remain a subject of debate. And more broadly, it means that the debate over whether Israel has been indiscriminately targeting civilian infrastructure or whether Hamas has been bedding itself within civilian institutions is not really going to be shifted, because both sides are going to dig in and say that they have enough evidence to prove their point.
Okay, so let's consider the reverse. In a world where we do eventually see conclusive proof of a command center underneath Shifa Hospital, what will it mean specifically about how Israel thinks about the total death toll?
Israel will say that it buttresses their argument that they are not totally to blame for such a high civilian death toll. They will say that, look, Hamas was embedded within Gaza's largest hospital. Is it any surprise that when we had to take action following Hamas's raid on Israel on October 7th, our response had a civilian toll?
But do you think it still begs the question about Israel's calculus when it comes to civilian deaths? And of course, the reason I ask you this is that Israel's stated goal, and really the goal in any military conflict, is supposed to be to target militants, right? Enemies, not civilians. But if the ratio is far, far more civilians are dying versus Hamas militants, that's pretty meaningful.
I think this question boils down to how many civilian deaths is too many civilian deaths. And there are many people who look at what's going on in Gaza and say that even one civilian death is too many. But to others, including many in Israel, the question really is about whether Israel is taking precautions to minimize the loss of civilian life when attempting the very difficult task of targeting militants who have based themselves in civilian areas. And that debate becomes even more complicated because we don't know how many militants, Hamas fighters from other Palestinian armed groups, have actually been killed. There are some suggestions that it could be as many as 5,000, some suggestions that it's much lower. They haven't said on the record how many fighters they've killed. We understand they are keeping track. They haven't said exactly what proportion of civilian death to military death is acceptable, and without doing that, they open the door for accusations that they are not taking enough care to prevent the loss of civilian life.
Patrick, it feels like from everything you're saying about the Israeli strategy, and from what the IDF soldiers told you when you were there in Gaza with them, that the Israeli belief really is that Hamas is hiding literally anywhere and everywhere, and so that everything is a potential target. But because the stated goal of Israel is to eliminate Hamas, it seems like the only logical outcome of that is basically the total destruction of Gaza, and of course even more civilians dying in the process.
Yes, and that's why when I went in early on Friday morning, we saw such devastation. Village after village of collapsed buildings, rubble, roads completely churned up, apartment blocks largely destroyed. It looked like a hellscape and largely unlivable.
So Patrick, are you getting any indication that any of this, the large numbers of deaths, the destruction that you yourself witnessed in Gaza, is making the Israelis at all queasy or uncomfortable with their overall strategy of targeting Hamas within civilian areas? I mean, is there any indication that they're considering whether there might be a different way to do all of this? Some other way where the toll on civilians is less severe? Are there other tactics being contemplated?
I think they're not just being contemplated, but we are seeing those actions to some extent being carried out on the ground, not in a way that feels meaningful to many of Israel's critics, but nevertheless they are taking place. And an example of that is the operation to capture Al-Shifa hospital. Following a lot of American pressure, Israel decided to send in only a small force to capture certain parts of it, and to search certain parts of it, rather than sending in overwhelming force that might have created a bloodbath. And while this is small consolation to many Palestinians, and indeed the people who are inside the hospital who have not had anything like proper treatment in the last few weeks, this was, in Israel's eyes, and indeed I think in the eyes of some of its allies, as an example of Israel trying to temper what it was doing.
Interesting. What about the question of hostages? Does all of this strategy to destroy Hamas and its military capability jeopardize that other major goal? Getting those 240 some odd hostages back? How does that factor into the strategy at this point?
On the one hand, the further that Israel pushes inside Gaza, the greater the chance of street fighting and even subterranean fighting between Israeli soldiers and Hamas fighters becomes. And as that likelihood rises, so too does the likelihood that hostages might be killed in the crossfire. And that's why there are protesters, not huge numbers of protesters, but there are protesters inside Israel who want a ceasefire in order to save the lives of hostages. The flip side, though, is that the further Israel goes inside Gaza, the more intelligence it's able to pick up about the location of the hostages, the likelier it is that it might be able to rescue some of those hostages. And thirdly, the likelier it is that Hamas might
The dead man was lying in the shadow of a parapet wall. He was a big man with big, bare feet. There was a sign beside him. It said he was a drug dealer. His head had been wrapped in packing tape, and that's when I heard the screaming. It came from the bottom of the bridge, a woman's voice, high and shrill. I saw her face first, and then her feet come running. She fell to her knees beside me, just outside the yellow crime scene tape. She said her name was Ivy. She said the dead man was her husband. She said she knew him by his feet. Rene Desierto had been salvaged. In the aftermath, I saw Ivy many times, and I told Ivy that there would be a book, and she said, tell them our love story. So that's what I'm telling you now. She loved him, he loved her, and she loves him all the way to now. For me, I want to keep a good record. I want to honor the people who told me their stories. So if I can put it on paper in as clear a way as I can, maybe it matters someday for whoever is looking for a reckoning. And at the same time, I mostly thought with so many names and so many bodies that the job was to reconstruct the man who was lost. When there was a challenge of likely crimes against humanity. The president said, "I'd like to be frank with you. Are they human? What is your definition of a human being?" So perhaps consciously or unconsciously across the book, I was trying to define the human being in whatever fashion other people see ordinary, regular, everyday people. Here's the call of the shoe. Here's the tenor of the scream. Here is what he last said to his mother. What I learned writing the book is that language matters, and that language builds realities. All over the world, charismatic men and women will tell stories. And sometimes we laugh because it's funny, and sometimes they'll say some things that are dangerous but not dangerous enough, and then maybe we'll applaud. And then they'll say something a little more dangerous, like maybe kill a drug dealer, and then later maybe kill a journalist, maybe kill an activist. And then maybe, because of what they say and what they do, a vigilante with a gun will also say, maybe some people need killing. The language matters, and the reason the book is called what it is because it is the bluntest way to say it. That some people do believe some people need killing. With violence all over the world, with many situations where some lives are considered less grievable than others, maybe it is proper to ask the question as bluntly as possible. Do we think some people need killing? My job is to stand over the body on the ground and then ask, did this have to happen? And always, the answer is, it's because someone stood behind the barrel of a gun and said yes. I hope someone, somewhere, might read the book and answer no to it.
That was writer Patricia Evangelista talking about her book, Some People Need Killing, a memoir of murder in my country. It's out now. This is NPR News.
It's 5:29. This is 91.7 WBXU and 88.5 WMUB.
Support comes from listeners like you and from Downbound Books, locally owned and operated in Northside, offering a carefully considered mix of fiction, non-fiction, poetry, cookbooks, kids' books, puzzles, and more. You can find them at 4139 Apple Street or online at downboundbooks.com.
Support comes from the Cincinnati Pops, presenting Holiday Pops December 8th through 10th in Music Hall. It's the most wonderful time of the year with JMR and the Pops. Music Hall will be decked out as choruses, dancers, and Queen City favorite Papathia Jenkins brings holiday classics to life. Tickets at CincinnatiPops.org. Season sponsor PNC, season sponsor PNC.
Mostly cloudy tonight, cool and dry, a low of 40. It's 52 in Cincinnati and Dayton at 5:30.
It's All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Ari Shapiro.
And I'm Juana Summers. Are you gearing up for Black Friday online shopping? Don't forget to keep an eye out for cyber scams.
Gmail on Black Friday. It's like kind of JFK Airport over Thanksgiving. Imagine a world where that airport didn't check IDs.
First, these headlines.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Windsor Johnston. The families of hostages being held by Hamas gathered in Tel Aviv today. NPR's Brian Mann reports the vigil comes ahead of an expected deal that could start the process of releasing their loved ones.
I'm in one of the major squares in the heart of Tel Aviv, and family members of hostages and their supporters have gathered here. There are candles lit everywhere. It's solemn. People have been telling me that they're...
there were some lights on in the hospital.
Are you looking for daily activities, entertainment, socialization, and security? Look no further. The good life is waiting for you at Maple Knoll Village. More information available at 513-782-2717 or online at mapleknoll.org.
And now back to The Whistler on Mystery Playhouse.
And now back to The Whistler.
Now you've done it, Ambrose. You've really made a mess of things. You're a fugitive now. They'll throw out a dragnet. You'll have to run and hide. Afraid of every shadow. You'll have to run, Ambrose. Hide and sneak and run for the rest of your days. Ambrose Brent, fugitive.
Ambrose Brent, fugitive. Ambrose Brent, 5 feet 850 pounds. Brown hair, blue eyes. Wanted for murder. Lunatic. Padded cell. Lunatic. Padded cell. Lunatic.
Hurry, Ambrose, hurry. More gas. Step on it.
What's that?
A sign, Ambrose, and a red flag swinging in the road. 2 men in black rubber coats. Too late to turn around now.
What's your hurry, mister? I'm pretty fast for Scarbuckers, ain't you?
Who are you? What do you want? State police. What are you stopping me for?
We're stopping everybody.
Why?
We're looking for someone.
Looking for someone? Who?
A fugitive.
A murderer?
We didn't say what he'd done. Let's have a look at your driver's license.
Driver's license? Well, that's funny. I must have
left it in your other suit, huh? Step out. Let's have a look at you. Hey, you come back here. What's eating him? He must be nuts. Well, I could have plugged him, but I just shot in the air. Just as well. He wasn't Mike Coretti. I could make 2 of him.
Know where you are now? Recognize this room? That's right. It's the room of death, where Henry was murdered the night before. His body has been removed, but the pad on his desk is still there, smeared with a large brown stain. There are 5 people in the room. Dr. Fenwick and Doris Brent, Jameson of Brent's butler, Inspector Fields, and Carnes of the District Attorney's office. The inspector is speaking.
District Attorney Carnes had an appointment with Henry Pierce. It was he who discovered the body this morning. Pierce had been dead about 7 hours. Right, Mr. Carnes?
That's right, Inspector Fields.
We attempted to reach Mr. Brent and were told by Jameson, the butler, that he left town at 2 in the morning. He told us about the place in the mountains, and there we reached you, Mrs. Brent.
You've no idea where your husband is, Mrs. Brent?
Not the slightest.
The butler said you had gone to Palm Beach.
Yes, I started for Palm Beach, but I changed my mind and went to the mountains.
And your husband came there last night?
Yes, it was about 5 in the morning.
9 o'clock. I flew up to the cabin and got there a few minutes before 9.
Why did you go there, Doctor?
Well, I advised Ambrose to take a rest. He's been working too hard and was heading for a nervous breakdown. When I learned of Henry's death, I went to tell him about it.
Doctor, you visited Henry Pierce here last evening.
I did. He phoned me to come over. I got here about 11. He'd made a new will and wanted me to witness it and asked if I would serve as executor. I read it and signed it.
I see. In whose favor was the will drawn?
Well, the old will left everything to Ambrose. Henry had no living relative. But because of Ambrose's mental condition, he decided to leave everything to Doris. Mrs. Brent.
That's correct. I found the will on the desk.
Was Ambrose Brent your patient? Yes, of course.
What was his trouble?
Too much work. He had a great responsibility. Did you think he was losing his mind? No.
Did he think so?
Well, he was terribly upset. He'd been having hallucinations.
Doctor, when was the last time you saw him prior to finding him in the mountains?
The evening before Henry died. I wrote him a prescription.
Mm-hmm. And where did you go after you left Henry Pierce last night?
I told my servants that I was going out of town for a holiday, but it was storming so rather heavily that I decided to state my bluff.
Mrs. Brent, did your husband and Mr. Pierce ever quarrel?
Not to my knowledge. They were the best of friends.
I see. Have you told us all you know, Dr. Fenn?
No.
Then I think you should. What was it that bothered Ambrose Brent?
Well, he said he had been writing himself notes. They were all alike, in his own handwriting, and all said the same thing. I must kill Henry.
I didn't know this.
Certainly not. That was the patient's private business. I thought that if I could get him away for arrest, he'd pull up.
There you are, Carnes. Must have been on his mind. Yes, but what's the motive?
An unbalanced mind that doesn't always meet.